Let's be honest about varnish. It is really hard and a nerve-wracking stage of the painting process. Is it necessary, and why do we need to do it? My name is Carla Grace. I am a full-time wildlife artist and I work in mainly acrylic and oil paint. In today's video, I am going to share a video from the archives. It is my old studio, and this is a live demonstration that I did with my subscribers on my tutorial platform, where I varnished one of my oil paintings in front of them and shared everything about the process of how I use varnish to prepare my paintings for sale, how I keep the dust off of it, and all the other little in-between bits and pieces of information that you would need if you were looking to start varnishing your art.
I'm going to start by discussing my surface here and the painting itself. So this is an oil painting. Obviously, a few of you have done this tutorial. It is a linen surface, so it is a flexible surface. Not ideal for using seals like resin or anything like that, which can yellow and crack over time on such a flexible surface. These like to be in a breathable environment, so using a varnish such as the MSA varnish or the Gamvar, they are a flexible varnish that allows movement in your artwork. So this is now 3 months cured. It is completely dry. We've had a very dry, warm environment for this painting. So I'm not worried about this oil painting not having enough curing time. So I'm comfortable to go ahead and varnish it so that I can package it and ship it to its collector. So let's go through the materials that I've got here. Obviously, I have my satin MSA varnish. The reason why I like to use satin, it's a personal preference. It isn't as milky as a matte, but it's not as glossy as the gloss varnish. So satin is nice in the middle there. And so the solvent to use to thin down the MSA varnish is just household mineral turpentine. You can use artist mineral spirits. However, I have had issues with that in the past. It's not strong enough and it doesn't evaporate enough from the varnish to make it streak free. So household thinners, it seems a little bit brutal, but that is the varnish, that the solvent that they have recommended. They have also created their own label turpentine for this brand. So to remove any confusion, they have created their own label for a bottle of turpentine to help everyone feel comfortable about the process. But it is literally household mineral turpentine. I have an old bottle of household mineral turpentine. If your turps looks like this, don't use it because that will discolor the varnish. So I use the old stuff to clean the brush, and so that will come into play later. I have my little jar and I have a mixing stick, and then the cleanup. Obviously, this is my brush. I've used this a lot. My bristles don't fall out of this one because it's so old, but it's a nice, even, stiff synthetic. So whatever works for you in this regard. You can use a sponge. You can use basically anything as long as it's got an even bristle. And yeah, it can go as big or as small as you like. This is what I'm going to use for the cleanup. So that comes later. So I am going to start preparing the varnish. So the reason why golden makes the varnish so thick is so that the matting agent doesn't solidify at the bottom. So varnishes that have a very fluid ratio of solvent and varnish, you'll often see when they're sitting on the shelf, the gloss will be obviously totally clear. The satin will have a small amount of matting agent down the bottom, and then the matte varnish will have a lot more. So that's literally all it is that changes it from gloss to matte varnish, is the amount of matting agent added to that varnish. Basically, all varnishes are made up of gloss varnish plus the matting agent. So Golden has created their formula in such a way that it is so thick that the matting agent doesn't go down to the bottom. That is why they recommend thinning it down. And the ratio they recommend is 3:1. So I am going to mix a little bit in my jar on the side. As you can see, it is it's sort of the consistency of honey. And I have done this fairly often, so I do know how the consistency must feel. And it doesn't need a lot of solvent in there. So now I'm just going to mix it. Make sure that there's nothing on your mixing stick or whatever you're using. I don't worry too much about bubbles at this stage. When you apply the varnish to the surface of the painting, the bubbles aren't an issue, I've found anyway with this varnish. And the reason why I use this varnish is because it's the only one that I've used that gives me a consistent streak-free result. I've obviously using different solvents, I've had issues with the streaks, but when I've been using the household mineral terps, I haven't had any issues with the streaks. Right. So I do also use paper towels. You can use a lint-free cloth, whatever works for you. Just pop that off to the side. So I'm just going to make sure that my brush doesn't have any dust in it. So just give it a flick, and if you see any dust raising from the surface, then give it a little bit of a extra vigorous shaking off to the side. That will also loosen any of the almost loose bristles and get those out. If you use a sponge, you're not going to have any issues with bristles falling out, and that is obviously the preferred method. So I would recommend using a sponge if you have that as an option. Now, I use the brush to get rid of the dust because it is slightly static. So it will hold the very, very fine dust in the brush itself. So it just means you have to regularly clean out your brush. And because blowing it obviously just blows it up into the air and then it resettles. So I'm just looking on the surface to make sure there's no fluffies sticking out that have gotten stuck in the oil paint while it was drying. And I'm using the reflection of the light on the surface of the painting to do that. I'm pretty happy with that. So dust can be an issue, and I will hang out with my painting for about 5 to 10 minutes after I've finished varnishing it, just to monitor the amount of dust falling on the surface. And if it's not too bad, then I will leave it. So safety things first. This is a solvent-based varnish, so we need to make sure that we've got good airflow. So crack a window open and have a fan on. That will also make the spirits evaporate off the surface of the painting, and that will speed up the cure time as well. Also, probably you should wear gloves. That would be smart. I'm out of gloves, and so this demonstration will be done without gloves. You can use a mask if you're very sensitive to solvent-based varnishes, but definitely having all the right gear will make it a much more user-friendly environment. Basically, you can see that satin has that milky consistency. It's not very matte, it's not very clear, so it's right in the middle. And you'll still see, even though it's got this matting agent, it won't hide the tones very much. It'll just create a varnished layer. So I'm ready to start. Golden recommends to work in a cross-hatching way to make sure your varnish is spread out evenly. So that's what I'm going to do. They also recommend applying 1 or 2 coats. So this is a much thicker varnish than Gamvar or even Winsor Newton, basically any of the varnishes. So I move very slowly and very purposefully when I'm applying this varnish. There's a fair amount of pressure. Otherwise, if you don't apply the pressure and the slow stroke with your brush, it'll sort of skip over the surface a little bit and you'll have some gaps in the application here. So you can see that even though this is a satin varnish, the finish of like the clarity is still there. So I don't have any issues with feeling like I've lost color with my painting when I apply the varnish. It's obviously a very methodical application. So I'm moving all the way around just to make sure there are no drips. So I'm starting to see a few little bits of fluff landing on the painting. So this is like the prime time to remove any bits of fluff that land, because once it starts to cure, which happens in about 10 or 15 minutes, any dabs, any changes you make to the surface become very obvious. It is going to get to the point where you're just going to have to leave it and accept that fluff might become a part of your painting. So I'm pushing a lot lighter on my brush now because I don't need to spread the varnish out. I'm just making sure that the varnish has an even finish to it. And I'm actually angled down so that I can see how the light is reflecting off the surface of the painting to make sure, A, there's no big bits of fluff sitting on the surface, and B, I haven't missed any parts of the painting, which has happened to me in the past where I've done the whole thing feeling like I've actually covered everything from start to finish, but then looking at the angle and the light and the angle of the painting, and there's a whole section in the center where I missed the varnish. So that sucked. In that situation, I had to reapply the varnish all over again. They recommend to allow 6 hours before applying the next coat and a week, 3 days to a week of full curing before packaging. So because this painting has sold, I am getting it ready for sale. I will be packaging it next week. So around about Thursday, Friday next week, I'll package the painting and then I will feel happy shipping it off. So the varnish is starting to feel very tacky as I'm brushing over it. So when it gets to that point and it feels like you're really pulling the paintbrush over the surface of the painting, it's time to stop because you'll change the surface. So as the varnish cures, it starts to solidify. And so you need to allow it to do that in an absolutely still state. If you keep moving the varnish around while it's trying to cure, it'll get stuck in the form with which you're moving it around in. So now what? We just sort of need to wait.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed that little throwback. It is much better viewed by other artists rather than sitting in the archives. So hopefully it was helpful. If you would like to see more of these videos that are much more polished, then please head over to my tutorial platform where you can see a whole range of tutorials that you can choose from. Otherwise, like, subscribe, comment if you would like me to post more here on YouTube, and I will see you in the next one.